Welcome to Demystifying PANS and PANDAS, the podcast where we uncover the mysteries, breakthroughs, and hope behind these life-altering conditions. I'm Dr. Nancy O'Hara, a board-certified pediatrician, educator, and advocate with over 3 decades of experience helping children and families navigate the challenges of neurodevelopmental and neuropsychiatric conditions, especially PANS and PANDAS. These disorders can feel overwhelming, but here we'll break down the science, explore transformative treatments, and share stories of resilience and recovery. If you've ever wondered what's possible for your child or how to find answers, this is the place to start. Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Nancy O'Hara, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Dr. Jill Crista to the podcast. She is a pioneering naturopathic doctor, a best-selling author, devoted educator, creative innovator. The adjectives and compliments could go on and on. But I do agree with her that her superpower is making complex medical concepts simple and digestible for the average person. I think that is a really relatable and important gift. So it is a superpower. And Jill's passion is to elevate the well-being of the planet by assisting and healing all of her inhabitants. And she focuses on conditions that cause injury to the brain, as I do, and to the nervous system, including mold, of which she is an international expert, PANS PANDAS, also an expert, Lyme disease, concussion, post-COVID syndromes. Her books, her products, her online courses support those wanting concrete steps to conquer these health challenges. And Jill, as I said to Scott Antoine the other day, sometimes I feel like, we're sisters from another mother, because when I see you saying something or I've watched other podcasts, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm right on that. I so agree. And
Yes.
I love what you do and so appreciate you being here.
Likewise, this is a real treat. It's a real treat. Thank you.
So you've written 2 great books, Break the Mold, A Light in the Dark. Both are great. Townsend Letters, Natural Medicine Journal articles, Alternative Therapy, Health Medicine. One that I didn't know was the antifungal therapy in water-damaged. It was a study of mold remediators, which I found fascinating. I love that article. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Thank you. Yeah. Yep. And then using antifungals, I take some heat for that. So I wanted to write up a case of where we did all the normal stuff, for this guy. And it wasn't until we added antifungals and then antifungals also in his nose that it was just like, boom, that was the missing piece. And he was my first case that I was like, I might be thinking of this not quite the right way, and started adding more intranasals to my protocols, and people got better so much faster. And I was like, okay, I've been missing something. So
Yeah.
So I wrote it up because
it was great.
Thanks.
Yeah. And for anybody that's looking for it, it's in Alternative Therapeutics and Health Medicine. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's linked on my website. You can find it on PubMed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
So
Made it through peer review.
and how did you get to where you are today? Can you tell me a little bit about your story?
Yeah, the mold story is I moved to Wisconsin and, came out of naturopathic school, ready for environmental medicine. I was trained in that. I was trained in food dyes and food allergies and all the things. So I found myself in a lead toxic area because there are lead mines not far away, and thought, I'm trained in this. No biggie, so I'm going to help these people with their high blood pressure and osteoporosis from lead and blah, blah. Did the therapies. Some people got completely better. Some people didn't. The people that didn't ended up having Lyme disease. And that was a big eye opener for me again, was, oh, this is more than a joint problem.
Yeah.
And so I went to ILADS, got trained in that. And when you apply the principles that we do, my sister in treatment, find and treat the cause, and people got better. But then there was a section that didn't get better. And in one of those patients, they found toxic black mold when they were remodeling, and they found the mold there. And then it was like, I wonder if the mold could be behind why he's not progressing on the Lyme treatment. His gut's a mess, his ear ringing, he has pelvic pain, his joints are breaking all the time, just all of these things that I was like, I wonder if this is related. And so I hit PubMed like I do and went, oh my goodness, I've been missing mold all
Yeah.
over the place. And so that was my big, eye opener, and just started applying what I was learning in the animal research, because we don't have human research. And there's a really good reason for that. Mold mycotoxins are known carcinogens. So we can't recruit patients to a study to say, hey, we're going to poison you with something that could
Right.
make you have cancer, but we don't know. And then we're going to put some of you in a treatment group where we don't treat you. And then we're going to put some of you in a treatment. We can't do it.
Right.
Medical
Right.
ethics says, nope, thank goodness. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah. And so when I was looking at the animal research, a lot of what they were using, I was very familiar with because it was basically natural medicine. And so I just started applying it and people started getting better. And I thought, well, I'm going to start sharing this, and teaching it with other doctors. And then I found all through this time, I've been a mom of twins with PANS. And when I was sitting in a Lyme lecture with Charles Ray Jones
Yeah.
on pediatric Lyme, and he had a slide on congenital, and I was like, oh boy, that would really stink, if that ever happened to somebody's kids. And
And
then,
lo and behold,
yeah, and so then I'm looking at the symptoms and I'm going, oh, I wonder if my kids have Lyme. Bring him to Dr. Jones, and he looks at me after the appointment. He said, so how are you doing with your Lyme? And I said, well, I don't have Lyme, I have fibromyalgia.
I know.
Even though I'm doing the training, it just was not sinking in. He said,
Yeah.
your kids have congenital Lyme by my records. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And then finding out that there was mold in that story as well. I was exposed to mold when I was pregnant with them, massive
Ugh.
amounts. And so it was just kind of like all of these things kind of came together into one picture. And I'm finding, I know we've talked about this, it's so common to see all of these things together.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
PANDAS, PANS, Lyme, mold, environmental, the whole thing. So
Yeah. And as you and I both say, it's not about the specific germ. I mean, when somebody listening may say, well, my kid has pandas, it's not mold. No, your child has an immune intolerance. They have inflammation that's causing these neuropsychiatric symptoms, but it's not to that specific germ. And so many of the kids, if not all of them, I feel in the Northeast here, are also affected by the toxins in their environment and particularly affected by mold.
yeah, mold. And, I know we both also talk about like the pesticides and the weed killer and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff, but it's just like, you go to some of these, any neighborhood, and you can start to just put all the pieces together of how we live right now, how we build our buildings. We build them in the middle of a rainstorm, or we don't manage our older buildings. And, it's just a lot setting the stage. Yeah.
Yeah, and in COVID, all the supply problems with thing sitting in shipping containers forever. Now a
Yeah.
lot of the new builds, I mean, people are saying to me, "Why live in a new house? It can't be a problem." No, no, no. A lot of the particle board in new builds are worse than our older homes.
Right. Right. Absolutely. It's so much more digested now, this wood that we're putting into buildings. And so it makes it really easy for mold, because it's like, oh, I excel at this. I'm
Yeah.
really good at breaking down previously living organic material. Sign me up.
Yep.
All I need is a little bit of humidity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I talk about the three-pronged approach to PANS pandas, and I know you do, but you have such a great way of saying it. I've heard you call it, beat the bugs, tame the flame, guard the gates. I love those phrases because that brings it home to families
Mhm.
that, oh, I can remember, tame the flame. All right, that means can you just
Yeah.
describe that, any of those a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. The idea is it's a core 4. I write in my book, I could have made it a core 10, but having been that parent who's overwhelmed, and I have 2 sick kids, I would have thrown the book against the wall and said, forget about it, 10 too much. So I disciplined myself to nail it down to, what are the things that really move the needle the most for the families that I work with? And taming the flame is number 1. So the core 1 is tame the flame. Core 2, beat the bugs. Core 3, regulate immunity. Because as you say, this is first and foremost an immune problem before it's a bug problem. And
Yeah,
then fourth is guard the gates, which means gates to our infections. So our respiratory passages, our throat, a lot of kids with, strep throat, our exposure to environmental toxicants like mold, like mercury, like weed killer, like EMFs, and then also our exposure, to the things that sometimes we can control and sometimes we can't. So like the EMFs are classic there. If you have a kid
Right.
they need to homeschool for a while, they're going to get some EMF. So how do we mitigate it instead of be fearful of it?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And I just think they're great ways of explaining things. And in your book, you have a whole chapter called Tummy Trouble, which is great. And could we all intuitively know this, but I think you explain it so well. Just expand a bit on the connection between the gut microbes, the immune system, the brain, all of that.
Yeah, thank you. I love to talk about this and I love to explain it to kids, which is how it has helped me bring these massively complex concepts down to like, how can I explain this to a kid?
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, we are outnumbered in our gut by our microbes on a cell by cell count and a DNA count. So there's more of them and more of their DNA than there is of us. And so they determine what our body considers us and not us. So in an autoimmune condition, the body gets confused between self and not self. Well, we understand what not self is. That's germs, pathogens, that kind of thing. But it turns out because of they're outnumbering us, what determines the self part is our tummy and our microbes in our gut. And so it turns out also that our gut tissue and our brain tissue come from the same embryonic cell. So when an embryo breaks up into its first three little parts, one of those parts is the brain gut. And so they're entangled and they get each other, So whenever something's happening in the stomach, the brain gets told in quantum leap fashion. It doesn't have to take chemical messengers and all this kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
immediate. And just like the brain can affect the gut, like if you're really stressed out, you're not going to digest well. The gut affects immune reactivity in the brain. And so the whole idea of tummy trouble is that if we can help correct what's going on in the stomach, in the microbes, that determines our immunity, but it also calms down what's going on in the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important. I often will, I'll have dads come in and they're like, well, it makes no sense. That's the gut, that's the brain, they're far apart, doesn't work. And I'm like, well, what happened the last time you had a six pack, of beer? You can help bring it down to them. And sometimes in understanding that what we put into our gut does affect our brain. But you're right, it's so much more than just the neurotransmitters and the immune molecules and all of that. They come from the same cells in the embryo.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. And even for tissues that don't, like the lung tissue, there are studies that show that the way that mold and mycotoxins affect the lungs, and we have a microbiome in our lungs too. A lot of people don't really
Right.
think about that. It's like we have a different microbiome for our gut, a different one for our lungs, for our sinuses, for our throat, for our ear. I mean,
Yeah.
there's for our skin. So there's one in the lungs, and if that microbiome gets tweaked to having more bacterial type dysbiosis that makes something called an endotoxin, that creates immune reactivity in the brain and leads toward autoimmune. So this is our connection of mold to PANS, is that if you're breathing things in and it's getting to your lungs, which is hopefully what your breath is doing, then it can cause this immune reactivity that tells the brain to start attacking itself. So it may
Yeah.
not even be strep biomimicry or those kind of things. It's tough. So we can make major, that's what the core three is, regulate immunity is mostly the gut. It's
Right.
mostly things that we're trying to correct the microbiome. Yeah.
Right. And I think so much in conventional medicine, allopathic medicine, we put things on, we name it something. Oh, well, you have pandas. Well, let's tame it with an antibiotic and then we'll blame everything on that. We're missing such a big piece when we do that, and also maybe causing harm to the gut itself with what we're doing.
Right. And confusing more immune confusion then, because then
Exactly.
well, what is self? I've now have a big bomb that went off in my gut and I now have different species. So now who is self and who is not self? Yeah.
Right, right. And as you said before, it's a double whammy. The immune system is exposed to the infection or some trigger, and the other is all the environmental toxins. So your top four are
Yep,
mold.
top four. Yep. Weed killer, mold, EMFs, mercury. And
Mercury.
mercury is a big problem.
Yeah,
Big problem. You know, the
yeah,
idea that we're still it's a proven neurotoxin and there's still an accepted dental practice to put that directly into a child's mouth that is like right here
yeah,
where it can cross into the brain. And then, you know, the longer it sits there, the more it off gases into a form of mercury that can cross the blood-brain barrier very easily. So yeah, mercury is on the list. And then, you know, I have some dishonorable mentions like chemicals and vaccines and those kind of things, but I wanted to keep to the top four that were really actionable, you know.
yeah, yeah. What about aluminum? Where do you
Bad
put that
news.
now?
Yeah, that's in
Yeah,
the toxic metal. It's kind of like chemicals, toxic metals, vaccines, that whole are the next
right,
batch. Yeah.
right, right.
Because aluminum,
Absolutely.
especially with the mold combination, it's known that aluminum increases the risk for childhood asthma.
Right,
So whether that is through, you know, we got it through our weather, you know, that whatever is being emitted into the environment or whether that was injected, you know, it still can create that increase in asthma. And there's a huge risk of asthma with mold. So it's
oh.
just another double whammy. You know, it's a great example of the double whammy. Mhm.
And the thing about mold, you can have a whole family that's there. Not everybody in the family may be susceptible, but you may have one child that has all the respiratory symptoms, the asthma, another child that has the neuropsychiatric symptoms, but really they have more in common than they do separate.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that because a lot of people have this misunderstanding that if it's mold, like if it's a problem with our house, wouldn't we all have the same stuff? And that's actually more the exception than the rule. The rule
Right,
tends to be that everybody is a little bit different. And it has to do with so many things. It has to do with genetics, but it also has to do with nutritional status. So we see that people who are better in their diet of omega-3s and sulfur-based things like the Brassicaceae family, like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, those people are more protected.
right,
And that's proven in animal studies. So they give the animals these things, and then they put them in a moldy barn, and then they see, you know, what happens. And it turns out those that have really good nutritional status are more protected. Their cells literally don't take up the mycotoxins as much.
right,
And also, like, is there also mold at school? So now they're getting like a double dose, or are they the one in the room with the moldy wall, or are they not? And so, you know, the idea that everybody's going to have the same look to it is really not a right expectation.
right. And with PANS in general, I would say if you know one kid with PANS, you know one kid with PANS. It's like autism, like many of the things we see. Yes, there may be an underlying genetic susceptibility, but it's so much more than that. Like you said, their nutrition, their triggers, when they got the trigger, what age they were, so many different factors.
Yeah,
Um,
and we're a perfect case in my own home. I have identical twin boys, and they together fit all the clinical criteria, but not individually. It's like they
Interesting.
both went to the plate of, you know, these are the symptoms of PANS, and they each grabbed one. And that's when I learned too about seronegativity. I have my
Oh, yeah.
thicker kid, his ASO never came up and still hadn't until he went through IVIG treatments and finally he was able to mount a response. Whereas my healthier PANS kid was through the roof ASO positive. And
Right.
I was just like, okay, there's more complexity to this story than just strep.
Right. And I think that's an important point in letting families know, a negative strep titer, a normal strep titer doesn't mean it's not pandas.
Right.
If you had the neuropsychiatric symptoms after a strep infection, you should be thinking about strep as a trigger because 30, 40, maybe more percent of these kids have that immunodeficiency like your son
Hmm.
and can't mount the response. And that goes for tick-borne disease too. You know,
Absolutely.
not only do we not test for that well,
Yeah.
it causes the immunodeficiency as well as an underlying immunodeficiency wouldn't let you mount the response.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. That was my lesson too of like, oh, I need to check total immunoglobulins.
yeah,
before I run any antibody-based testing, because that, to expect to see something in the normal range or above normal, if we're starting from not enough total soldiers in the first place,
Right.
then, all of the rest of the labs need to be augmented or given some sort of a mathematical augmentation so that we're saying, okay, this kid can't actually mount a response. So even a weak positive is a positive in that kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think some of our tests are even so gross, meaning, we have to look for those low normals, those mildly normal abnormals, rather than just the really abnormal ones, because it's such a spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, you are my mold expert. No question about it. Everything that Jill says to do, my patients know that's what we'll do. That's it. But expand on mold and its role in PANS, if you could. Just
Sure. Sure. So the way that mold affects the body is mold fragments, which are more allergenic than living mold. So dried out mold that then we do a big DIY remediation or remodeling, and we disrupt mold that we didn't know was there, but it's dried out. That can actually create more mast cell recruitment than living mold, than being
yeah,
around the colony itself. And then mold also, if it is living, it's spitting out these chemicals of just, I call them mold farts just because that's what it is technically. It's off gassing,
yeah,
And unfortunately, though, one of those is something called mycophenolic acid. And for those that don't have medical training that are listening, mycophenolic acid is used in medicine called Cellcept. And it is used by doctors to suppress the immune system so it doesn't reject the new organ in an organ transplant.
yeah.
Now, why would mold make that? Because it's trying to always colonize more territory. And so if it shuts down our immune system from rejecting foreign substances, it can move in and you can become the moldy building. And also the mycotoxins, they are known immunotoxins. They are toxic to the nervous system. They cause mitochondrial depletion. So the immune system is knocked down in three ways: the cells themselves, the epigenetics, meaning the inflammation soup that they're swimming around in, and then genetics. So mycotoxins can actually rewire you to be more susceptible to fungal infection and all infections. So then we have that in the mitochondrial deficiency. So now your soldiers are running on low power mode. And that really sets the stage for this immune
Yeah.
deficiency. Yeah.
Yeah. And immune metabolic, like you're saying, and they all play a role together. And I think one of the things to bring home also is dead mold is still mold. I
Is
mean, it's still a factor, and so many of our contractors, et cetera, that go into homes and poo-poo it, I think are causing a lot more damage for our families that are dealing with this as a problem.
Absolutely. Because we really have to talk about, I'm so glad you said this because I try to make this point all the time. Dead mold is a fragment.
Yeah.
Dead mold has been broken. If it's still intact, it's dormant. So all it is waiting for is a really humid summer, and then it starts growing. And so you can be more symptomatic in the summer, but kind of okay in the winter. Vice versa, obviously, in the winter, you got to close up more. But, all that dormant mold needs is humidity over 50%. Gee, do you live anywhere that's like a little over 50%? So yeah, that's doing people a lot of harm. A contractor is looking to see, is that mold growing a hyphae? Is it making a
Right,
root? And
right,
if it's not, they say it's dead mold. That's false. That's
right,
dormant mold. And we've got to get it out. Mold should not be in our indoor space, period.
right. Absolutely. And say that one more time. Mold should not be in our indoor space.
Period.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And one of the things I get a lot from people is you hear, well, mold can cause this, mold mycotoxin disease can cause this, a low appetite, a high appetite, explain that a little bit more to people, because mold causes low stomach acid. And I think there are so many different ways it can act. And again, act differently in different kids or people.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually sat down and did the math because I thought, okay, since it is the norm, not the exception, that everybody reacts differently, how many different variations of a moldy building could there be? Because
Oh,
that's also really important. Every mold makes a different kind of mycotoxin. Some mycotoxins are made by different, like multiple species of mold, and some molds will make multiple toxins. So I sat down, I did the math, and I was like, okay, these are the molds that we can find in moldy building. Here are the chemicals that one makes. Here's the chemicals that one makes. Here's the chemicals that one makes. Here are the bacteria. Here's the chemicals. And it's 15 million possibilities. So
oh
no
my.
wonder we're missing this, and no wonder it's different, because it was like, we're basically looking for conditions that are a needle in the haystack, a 1 in
Yeah.
15 million. Yet we have over 25% of buildings built in the US that have a toxic mold problem. So that's why this is kind of a complex picture, because as we look at the types of molds, some of them are better at generating mast cells. Some of them are better at generating what am I trying to say? TH1, TH2 balance
Right.
would be great for helminth therapy, which I've learned from you. So it depends on the mold, but then what toxin are they making? And that's how we can get this mishmash, confusing picture, because we have literally 15 million possibilities of mixes that this person's exposed to. And we're calling it one condition.
Right.
It's
Right.
like,
It's crazy.
what?
And by the way, your math is a heck of a lot better than mine to get to the 15 million. I would have stopped long before you got there. And
Oh, no, calculator. So trust me,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, still. But
I did have to
but
look up again. How do I do a probability? I don't remember. That is that times the toxin plus the next spore, or is it time? But yeah, anyway, I did the math, and it was very illuminating and also really reassuring of like, if your doctor has missed this, they're not a bad doctor.
Hmm,
It's a really difficult thing to identify. And I'm a very impatient practitioner. I like to get to the cause and get to the treatment and have it be targeted. And I know you're the same way, because I've heard you talk, and yeah, we're very much the same. And so I created a questionnaire for clinical identification of it. That was, Dr. Horowitz has a validated questionnaire that was based on Dr. Birascano's Lyme questionnaire. So I was like, I'm
correct.
gonna use that same idea where we weight the symptoms with different weights. So if it's a really common thing and it's not necessarily a mold thing, but it's a common mold thing, that's going to get lower weight than something that's targeted to mold, and it points way more arrows to this is a mold problem. So I created a clinical questionnaire. It's actually right now part of a study where we're validating the questionnaire, and then we're going to data mine all of that. So we can start to narrow the 15 million possibilities to, if you're seeing this cluster of molds, you're probably going to have this cluster of symptoms. And then we're already working on precision treatment so that if you're seeing this mycotoxin, we know it gets out of the body through this detox pathway. Let's get that one done more efficiently. So,
Right. Since you mentioned the study, why don't you just tell people a little bit more about it? Because I think it's so important. Like you said, we can't do a prospective study where we give, this group of people mold mycotoxins and this group not. That's not going to happen. But this study is so important in gathering that data. So can you tell people a little bit more about it and where they might be able to help be part of it?
thank you. Thanks. And also thanks to Change the Air Foundation. They're funding our study, and it's at the moldiq.org website. People can go there and you could submit your own data. This is a crowdsourced data collection, because we knew, and I know doctors are busy. Getting even like a VAERS report done is a really important thing to do and still doesn't get done. So,
Yep.
to ask doctors to do this, it was over the top. So we're just asking anybody, if you have been diagnosed recently with a mold-related illness, we're trying to collect, for the purpose of right now, for validating, and now meaning early 2025 for anyone listening 2 years from now. Um, what we're trying to do is get recent diagnosed people that you've had some kind of whatever lab test your doctor decided. I'm very agnostic about which test. We just want a test that says this is mold-related illness, and then we're correlating your symptoms, and then we're gonna deep dive that and then publish everything that we find. And we're correlating any building information you may have if you've had an inspector come and do an inspection. So it's all things you can submit yourself. And we're keeping, it's all HIPAA compliant. It's reviewed by an IRB board. So everything's very safe and protected. And so no, personal information is going to be out there for anybody. It's just your information. So hopefully what we will be able to tell from this is the questionnaire valid or not? If yes, what things are on the questionnaire that don't need to be there to, just keep it shorter? Is there a way we could improve on that for diagnostics? And if it is valid, you can use the questionnaire as a diagnostic instead of a lab test if you're in a low income situation. So
Right.
that's our goal, is like to off the IBD questionnaire. There are lots of things in medicine where we use a questionnaire for diagnosis instead of a lab test, or in lieu of. So
Right.
that's what
And I think that's so important. I mean, treating this and having this illness is so, whether it be PANS, PANDAS, mold disease, the whole gamut,
yeah,
it's so daunting emotionally, psychologically, physically, and financially.
totally.
And any way that we can help these families not keep spending the money that they're spending on testing. So please fill out the questionnaire if you're newly diagnosed. And if you're one of my patients, I've given it to you, please do it. But anyway, and one of the things you said earlier that I wanted to touch on a little bit more is, one of the things you taught me that I think is so important is the connection between some forms of mold mycotoxins and mast cell activation. And
Mhm.
mold disease causing this mast cell mediated disorder. And unless we recognize that piece and treat that, they're not going to get better either.
Right, right, absolutely. When I look at, again, I'm just always researching the studies of like, what is the prevalence of this? And for fungal infections, mast cells are the most recruited. So
Yeah.
and when I say infection, what do I mean? I'm talking about when, because we're breathing mold spores all the time. So no one should be allergic to mold, for starters. If you're allergic to mold, your bucket is too full of that one thing. So
Yep.
pay attention to that. That's a sign of mold-related illness. So what we want is for our bodies to be exposed to, outdoor molds and things like that, and just be able to digest it with snot, this beautiful stuff we have up here. It's full of enzymes and salts, and it can digest things, and it's no big deal. But if somebody is reactive, or if they've been exposed to it long enough that the immune system is starting to get impaired, now these spores can set up shop. They can become
Yeah.
residents. And we don't want them to be residents, because once they become a resident, they start acting competitively, because our flora says, wait a minute, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in and out. You're supposed to be breathed in and breathed out, not sticking around. And if it's sticking around, our own immune system will start to respond differently. So what used to be a beautiful commensal microbiome of our sinuses slowly transitions into being a biofilm, which is more
Yeah.
pathogenic. And what happens with fungi to get the mast cells started is the minute they become residents, they want to start doing what? Root. And when they start rooting, that's when we get the most mast cells recruited. And so that was my lesson to me in the article that you were talking about, the antifungal treatment of mold-related illness, was when we added antifungals, we impaired the rooting, all the mast cell stuff stopped.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, now I see mast cell activation as a call for help, for invasion of some kind. Now it could be parasites too, because a lot of people that have been exposed to mold, when they get that immune depletion, leaves them more susceptible to the normal parasites we digest and deal with every day.
Right. Right.
They, again, become residents. So yeah, it could be that, but fungi are very, very proficient at generating mast cells.
Yeah. And treating the mast cell, in addition to treating the fungus, using antifungal herbs, sometimes medications, treating the mast cell activation can also be a game changer,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
absolutely. And there are lots of plants that that do many, many different things we need with mold, like aloe. The inner
Yeah.
leaf of aloe is one of my favorites because it's a binder. I call it the binder that gives back. It's like, just it's
Love
just
that.
like charcoal and clay, does the same adsorbent, but it's antihistamine, it blocks H1 receptors. It's an immune modulator. It helps the mucus layer of our gut, our bladder, our respiratory passages. So it soothes, it's doing all of these things. And, it's managing mast cells. It's one of the most potent plant mast cell inhibitors that we have.
Right. And it helps counteract the constipation too. So I love aloe. It's, I did learn that there is a lot of aloe there that's not real aloe.
Oh,
So
yeah.
please look at the list of ingredients, the ones that start with, sugar as the first ingredient and some other chemical as the second, and aloe's down there about the 10th, not the one you want to get. You want to make sure it's certified as an aloe that is a real aloe product.
Yep. Yep. Good. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of alteration in the herbal world, unfortunately. That's usually my start, when somebody says, "Oh, I can't tolerate blah, 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 because I have oxalates," or I'm like, well, let's first start with what version of that plant did you experience? Because it
exactly.
may not be an oxalate problem. It may not be a salicylate problem. It could be junk.
Yep,
It wasn't really the
exactly.
herb.
Exactly. And I was talking to Tanya Dempsey, who does a lot of work in mast cells the other day, and she was saying with medications, one of the things that's very important is what's the vehicle?
Yeah,
What is it being carried in? What else is in there? It may not be the actual medication. It may be the gel cap that it's in, the liquid that it's put in. That vehicle is very important too. So
absolutely.
it's one of the reasons I like a lot of the products that you are developing. Do you want to talk about those at all?
Oh, I'd love to.
Oh,
It is
please
such a
do.
passion project.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm working with a company called Alight Health Formulas, doing formulating and getting to do all this stuff, like the stuff behind me. For those who are listening, they can't see, but it's my little herbal shelf back here. All these little mixes that I've been making for these PANS kids and, mold sick patients and Lyme patients, that kind of thing. So we have 4 products that are liquid, alcohol-free herbal glycerins that are a mix of what I call the botanical avatars for pandas and pans. So they're on the base of that foundation. These are plants that, if we could pick a plant that's perfect for pandas and pans, what would it do? And we'd have a list. It'd be an immune modulator, it'd be an antibacterial, it would be a neurotransmitter balancer, it would, help the gut and da 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 da. So we go down antihistamine, anti-mast cell. There are plants that do all of those.
Yeah.
And there's a chemical that ties the bind of all of them called triterpenoid saponins, which only matters to the herbalist listening. So when we get those herbs and we put them together and they create this foundation, it just creates this foundation of calm and lifts the basement that the kids are in. It gets them back to the first floor, and then we can do all the other stuff. So it's not in lieu of, it
Right.
is the thing that stabilizes the whole process. So
Right.
that's what I'm working on, is not only what we're putting in the bottle, but also some of the things we're leaving out of the bottle that a lot of people would say, oh, that's really good for the brain, and so we should use that. But if a kid is in a dopaminergic or glutaminergic surge, those things can be harmful. So you want to keep those out of the bottle and use them only when the kids hit the basement of
Got it.
the neurotransmitter thing again. So it's what's in the bottle, but also what's not in the bottle, so that it can be used all throughout the flare, the relapsing remitting cycle. They can be used continuously, and then you can insert all the other stuff that gets them either through a flare or out of a period of despair, because now you've calmed the attack on the dopamine receptors, and now they feel in despair because they're running on low dopamine. So that's
Yeah.
the, up down cycle of the condition.
Yeah.
So
And one of the botanical avatars that you talk about that I love is Chinese skullcap. I
yes.
mean that that can be really helpful in this foundational,
Yeah.
piece.
It just kind of
Yeah.
is like the beep, just
Yeah.
keep the skull cap there as and then all the other things can be on top of it. Mhm.
Right. And so many of your products are doing just that, taming the flame with the feverfew, the nettles, things like that I think are so key also.
Yeah.
So,
And, rosemary is a tricky one in liquid because it can really overwhelm a formula, but I think we've done a nice
mm.
job of putting enough in there without having them feel like they're eating like garlic potatoes the entire day.
Yeah. And then not orally, and you mentioned this just a few minutes ago, but I wanted to touch on a little bit more. I think the inhalational piece is really key. And sometimes we use nasal sprays, but you had a great video on your site, I think, on a time inhalation. So
Yeah.
talk more about using herbs especially, but different products and why the inhalation of them is so important.
Yeah. So back to that idea of the lung microbiome flaring the brain, if we can get things deep into the sinuses and deep into the lungs, then we can start to calm down what the brain is upset about. That reactivity, that immune reactivity that's happening. So there are steam inhalations have been used since the beginning of time. Well, funny time. I didn't mean that pun, but it was a good one.
Yep, yep, yep. Got it. Yeah,
And
the
there's
first time I heard you say it, I had to think, is she talking THYME or TIME? Well, they both work.
Yeah, so it turns out when we steam these herbs, they become more antimicrobial and more anti-inflammatory than if we did them as if we ingested them. Isn't that wild?
Wow, that is
And then you
wild.
think like a kid who's got separation anxiety and that kind of thing would be kind of afraid of being underneath, basically what you're doing is you're steaming the herbs, making a big pot of herb tea in essence, and then putting your head over the top with a regular dish towel or anything like that, or a towel. But the kids love it. It's like
Yeah,
they get to just be, they feel protected and they feel better. I mean,
yeah,
I can't tell you the parents that are like, I didn't think they'd really been down for this, but they love it. They ask for it and they'll start making their own. So they get
yeah.
the kettle on or they get the microwave water going. I don't care how they get it done. And then, they can make their own. It's very simple. And
Yeah, you can just take the fresh herbs and put them in the boiling water.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a beautiful thing, and like you're saying, the kids can do it with their parents. And
Yeah.
I had a couple of kids that did it together, and it was like a little fort. And they got in there, and they came out so happy. It was the only thing they ever did together. But
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah. And then there are some herbs like thyme that will help stimulate the cilia, which is the little fingers, those who are listening, the little fingers in our lungs and our sinuses that move all of the secretions up and out. And a lot of the mold mycotoxins, particularly chetoglobicin, paralyze the cilia. Now, why would they do that? So
hmm,
they can move in,
yep,
It's like mold's
exactly.
always working for itself. And so we can use thyme, which is antifungal, anti-strep, and antiviral, and then you're inducing the cilia to move, and then it has a brain calming effect as well. So there's just I love doing things that are going to do a lot of, one thing can take care of a lot of problems at once, and it's very easy to do. You can also
Yeah,
use essential oils,
yep.
aromatherapy, even if we're not using it for the antimicrobial part in the nose, that I use a lot for antifungal. There are certain essential oils that will calm limbic system activation. And that is so wonderful to see as well. Like I have a lot of parents that are I have one mom in town actually who makes these and then she sells them to the other families. And it's just tansy, lavender, black spruce. These are all shown to calm limbic activation in the brain. And the kids can have these in their pocket, these little inhalation sticks. And when they're starting to feel intrusive thoughts or anxiety or OCD compulsions, just take a sniff of the inhalation stick. It's
Exactly.
so easy.
My adult son, who works getting his PhD in chemistry, it's one of those things that's not the best lab to have a previously very sensitive child in, but
Yeah.
using these sorts of things whenever he's exposed to something or whenever he's feeling, like you said, a limbic system attack,
Yeah.
it's a great thing to carry in your pocket, your backpack. These are simple things that are not expensive that really can help.
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
And then, on a low budget, you can just buy the essential oils and then recharge the stick yourself, so you're just basically dumping the oil into these sticks. It's just a cotton swab, you know,
exactly.
basically. So yeah, it's very simple, very elegant, and it puts the control in their pocket, literally, in their
Yeah,
hands. Yeah.
yeah. Well, speaking of another intervention that again I learned from the wonderful Dr. Jill Crista is nicotine patches. And I'll tell a quick story of the first young woman that I used this on. And I had just heard you lecture about it, and I thought, I don't know, I feel comfortable with that. I don't know. Jill just had so many more balls than I do. Anyway, and this young woman was really suffering with mold and finally was living in a place that she thought was free of it. And I just really thought she would be better than she was, and she wasn't getting better. And I said, well, just heard at this conference about nicotine patches, and I wonder if you would consider trying it. And she said, well, I've never told anybody this, but I take a puff of a cigarette every 30 minutes, and that's the only thing that makes me feel better. And she started using the nicotine patch, and I mean, it was such a game changer for her. So I
Wow.
talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you for letting me. I know that's kind of controversial, the idea nicotine's been very vilified. It's kind of like marijuana. We're learning, oh, we all have endocannabinoid receptors and it can be beneficial if used appropriately. That's the same with nicotine. This is based off some early COVID studies where they were noticing that smokers weren't getting sick. And there was a dose response, meaning the more they smoked, the less chance they were getting sick and no hospitalizations. And that goes completely counter to what we were anticipating because it's a respiratory virus, right? So
Exactly.
how is that happening? So these researchers were like, well, could it be something in the chemicals? Because there's over 600 additive chemicals to every tobacco product on the market, which is stunning. So is it the pyrazines, which is what they add to make sure that it's addictive, or could it be the nicotine? And so they use nicotine patches, and these people that had long COVID, it was only 4 patients, even though they didn't do it perfectly, but the protocol was 7 days and then stop. So basically you
Right.
wear a patch every day, you replace it every day, like you would if you were doing smoking cessation, and then you stop. And they found out that not only were the symptoms completely gone, but it was durable 6 months later, which means they
Yep.
didn't even need to repeat it. So to me, I'm like, as an inpatient practitioner, as I said, I'm like, sign me up for that kind of treatment because this idea of taking something over and over and over again. So I started trying it with my patients that had long COVID. And the whole mechanism is there's a different receptor than the ACE2 receptor
Right.
then that is being attached to by a different peptide than the top of the spike. So the top of the spike is the ACE2 part, but there's this other little neurotoxic like peptide on the side that binds to this nicotinic receptor. And my theory is that it's binding to it kind of in a permanent way, or it's permanently changing the conformation of that receptor. And so despite this peptide has really high affinity, but nicotine has higher affinity because it was originally designed for nicotine
Right.
as a nicotinic receptor, which if you have a lot of these, you might be a person who craves a lot of high nicotine foods. Like maybe you love eggplant. Well, that
Yeah.
means you highly express this, but it also means that you're more susceptible to getting permanent or not permanent, long-term spike problems. So as I was using it, I was seeing exactly what they saw in the studies, 2 years of chronic migraines since COVID, nothing working, better in 2 weeks of nicotine patch treatment. I
Yep.
mean, there's case after case, lost taste and smell, that's a nicotinic receptor damage problem. You can get
Correct.
that back in 2 days on the nicotine patch. So it's all of these things that I was seeing long COVID get better. And then I had patients that were like, hey, could this be making my POTS better? And when you look at what the nicotinic receptor is, it's a nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, which runs our autonomic system. So
Right.
it was starting to improve symptoms in my dysautonomia, gastroparesis, POTS patients. And I was like, well, yeah, that mechanism makes sense. We've just
Yep.
allowed this receptor to work again. And it doesn't have to be nicotine forever. It's nicotine on and off. On,
Right.
pulsing on maybe for a week, and then we take it off for a week. And then we put it on for a week and we take it off for a week. So, and if anyone's worried about addiction, it does create tolerance, but you can combat that with theanine. Because the more nicotine you use, the more receptors you build. But if you're taking theanine, it will keep it down at the original level. So that's a really easy thing. It's very calming. You can take it at night.
Yep.
So, there's ways to do this in a safe way. And then the next thing I was getting was, hey, could this be making my mast cell activation better? These are people I have on antifungals and they're getting out of mold. And I'm like, maybe, so I just getting into the mechanisms and I learned that this little peptide that's on the branch of the spike protein is a neurotoxin, but it also disrupts collagen formation. And if it's there and stuck in that receptor, the ACE2 mast cells highly express ACE2 receptors. So the longer that thing is sticking in that receptor permanently until we bump it out with nicotine, the top part is able to agitate all these mast cells.
Right.
The side part is able to mess up all the collagen. So it was also helping all of my hypermobility patients. So
Yep.
now I'm just like, holy moly.
So all of your patients now are walking around with a
Totally, yeah.
nicotine patch.
Right,
Okay,
right.
got it.
And I'm trying not to have nicotine goggles on, so I'm trying to apply it appropriately. But I had to, as I'm seeing these results, I had to expand. I had to push myself of like, how young can I feel comfortable using this? Because I was using it, a 16-year-old, no problem. Or 9-year-old, 7-year-old, am I comfortable? But they are really struggling kids.
Yeah.
And we're putting them on biologics. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't I try this? I'm putting them on, years of antibiotics. Why wouldn't I try this? And it's
Right.
been phenomenal.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about you is it's not just about, well, try this. So I read that in some, you're really looking at the mechanisms, and it's
Yeah,
really about the science behind it, that there
yeah,
is a reason that this makes sense. And and I got to do one more because we both love food-based binders and
yes,
using a lot of chia and flax, and using modified citrus pectin in that way has been a game changer for me, because I think in a lot of these little kids, when we add too many, so much of the time, MDs especially are talking about Welchol or cholestyramine, and we end up causing more problems than we're helping because of the constipation we cause, the problems in the family because it has to be so far from other things we take. Just mention that quickly before I
yes,
before I
yeah.
let you get out of here.
I know we could talk for weeks.
Oh, I could.
Yeah, that's another thing, trained as a naturopathic doctor, I was trained that insoluble fiber and soluble fiber, they're very good bile binders. And when we're talking about an inhalational exposure, that mycotoxin isn't free floating in the gut. It's in the bloodstream. And then where does it go? It goes to the liver to be packaged in bile, and then the bile is what's carrying it to the gut. So all we need is something that can grab bile. And that's why
Yeah,
Welchol and cholestyramine are used, but
exactly.
they are very unspecific binders, so they can bind other things. Whereas the fiber is binding bile specifically, and it's nourishing the very nutrients that cholestyramine and Welchol take out. So when we provide the fiber, that's where we get our vitamin A. So we get
Yep.
a lot of our E. That's where we get, these microbiome nourishing things. So, swinging back to the beginning with tummy trouble, you can actually be giving these things that are nourishing the microbiome, and that's strengthening their immune system and calming their brain.
Yeah.
So yeah, way to bring it around to full circle.
Yeah, good bringing it around there. Oh, Jill, you have such a great way of explaining things, and I love talking to you. And please tell people where they can find some of the things that either the survey or your articles, your other podcasts, your courses, which are great. Um,
Yeah, they can go to drcrista.com. It's all on there. That's drcrista.com. And yeah, I'm starting a whole series of monthly masterclasses on mold. We're deep diving into just one aspect of it, like binders. Like, how do you do it? Not just it's a great idea, but actually, how do you do it? What are some of the factors that may tell you to back off a little bit and that kind of thing? So yeah, if anybody's really struggling and they feel like they want some of those individualized topic areas that are the barriers to your recovery, please join us.
yeah.
Yeah.
And any last words or anything that you want to say to the people that might be listening or watching, pearls of wisdom?
I think when I know you're right here with me, but get outside.
Oh, yes.
Get outside.
Yeah.
I mean, if whether mold is in your house or you have a PANDAS PANS kid who's circadian rhythm is completely off kilter because of their neuroinflammation, that is the original grounding station, you
Yeah.
know? And so if that isn't happening every day, and I mean every day, multiple times a day, that disconnection is where we can really get off. And so the people that are better about getting outdoors, connecting with where we are, we're here on Gaia, that
Yeah.
they recover faster. It's just that simple.
So agree. And so get outside. You can take your podcast with you if you want to,
Yes.
but get out there, whether it be in the woods or on the beach, or just get in the dirt. And that's what I recommend for so many of our families. We really need that. And Jill, I cannot thank you enough. And we'll see each other again soon. For those of you who may not be coming, if you'd like to hear Jill speak, she'll be speaking at medmaps.org in Myrtle Beach in March with me. Thrilled that she's going to be doing that. And thank you again, Jill. Really great to see you and especially to hear you. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Demystifying PANDAS. I hope you're walking away with insights, tools, and hope to help you and your child on this journey. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Share this podcast with anyone who might need it. It could be the lifeline they're searching for. And if you have a moment, leaving a review helps us reach even more families who deserve answers. Also, for more information, training, and community, check out our website, drohara.com, and join our annual membership. And remember, every step forward, no matter how small, brings us closer to healing and understanding. Until next time, be present, be hopeful, and we look forward to seeing you next time on Demystifying PANS.